Hello, welcome to another edition of Inside Rosenberg and Estes. I'm here with a guest, Alexis Axelrad from Barst Mukamal. She's an immigration attorney, and she's here with us today to discuss some developments concerning foreign real estate investment and what effects current policies have on the real estate market. So, welcome, Alexis.
Thank you so much for having me. I speak so much, both to a lot of other U.S. immigration lawyers and the Society of Human Resource Management and other lawyers who don't do, what I do, but to have the opportunity to speak specifically about how it impacts real estate is really exciting and interesting, and just shows that immigration really touches everything, like so much that people don't even realize, because most people don't even know what U.S. immigration is or isn't. It's not until it's on the TV and they hear more about it, especially in an election year, but it really does touch so many facets of our world.
And it's definitely a hot issue this election year. It's the foremost of everyone's concerns. So before we get into it, please tell us a little bit about you and what you do and your practice.
Sure. So I've been a U.S. immigration lawyer for 27 years. Hard to believe, but very true. When I was young in my career, I used to say it was like dog years for every year to try to make myself, seeing, clients not be nervous that a paralegal or a student was going on their case. But now it really has been 27 years. I've been at my firm for 26 years. I've been a partner since January 2012, and all I really do practice is U.S. immigration law, but it really touches so many areas. I mean, I do everything in U.S. immigration law. I went to court, did all kinds of removal and deportation work. I have a client who's just walking around Queens right now with a motion to suppress. But then as you change in career and your practice and you're a partner, my practice skews pretty heavily corporate, so business immigration, but that's also individuals, companies. I have a heavy family practice, which means green cards based on marriage or other family relationships that we recognize. Our firm still does asylum work and still does go to court. Section between criminal law and immigration law. You certainly, if this ever comes up in anyone's practice, where someone's looking at the criminal, they're going to take a plea or do whatever, make sure that they understand for a foreign national what that means for them. And then heavily filing U.S. citizenship applications, especially in election year, for
Right.
anyone who's listening, for themselves or are watching, anyone for themselves or anyone they know that had a green card and is eligible for U.S. citizenship, whether they just became eligible or they've had that green card for 30, 40 years. They think they have to give up their passport from their home country. They really don't. The U.S. doesn't require that. This is the time to become a U.S. citizen. Citizenship applications are going quite fast, and you want to be able to vote in this election or future elections. Don't vote before that. Don't vote before you're a U.S. citizen. That's a bar forever. And really, because of the way we grew up in this firm, we handle every type of immigration work. So when I talk to someone, I can diagnose what the issue might be, what we might be able to do, and the path forward, not in a silo, but really looking holistically at everything that happens. The two other things I'll add is that our U.S. Immigration Bar Association, AILA, the American Immigration Lawyers Association, we're a 17,000 member bar association. I'm on the executive committee, so I'm currently first vice president, and I will be president of our bar association in 2 years. And on top of that, I'm heavily involved with the Society of Human Resource Managers, specifically in New York, so a sponsor and a frequent speaker. So that's my areas. Human resource professionals are very important in our practice. So knowing and advocating for what's happening in U.S. immigration. Spend my days.
Okay, great. And just to clarify, I mean, I know you represent individuals, but you're also advising on the human resource side. So you're
Yes.
helping corporations, companies that have immigrants, on green cards working for them and coordinating those types of programs that allow for, work visas for companies. Relative to what we do at R&E, we've done a lot of lending with EB-5 money. And EB-5 was a very hot topic. I don't know how hot it is at the moment. Maybe you could give us some insight on what you know about EB-5.
Sure. I mean, EB-5 was definitely in the news. One of the projects that people really have heard about is Hudson Yards and the EB5 money that was part of that. That's a successful project as far as I think the entities related to that are. I do know that the investors for EB5 and Hudson Yards are still waiting to get their money back. Then the less successful ones, one where there were real problems, people have heard about J Peak in Vermont, which led to Vermont not even being able to do it anymore for that project. But EB5 is it's still a really important part of our immigration scheme. I mean, our laws have not changed since 1990. That's a lot of things that people hear about. And people still very much want to come to the United States and they still want to invest in us. So EB5 is not the hot topic as it was or it feels like, but it actually is in the amount of inquiries that we get, and people are still filing EB5s all the time. The
So
biggest
how does it
change.
work? How does EB5 work? I mean, let's start there.
So I would say, that's the biggest change is what people hear about the $1 million visa. So if it's a direct investment in a U.S. business that is going to create 10 jobs for U.S. workers, and a U.S. worker is a U.S. citizen or a green card holder, if it's a direct investment, it used to be $1 million. Now it's 1.05 million. If it's in a targeted employment area, that's supposed to be in a high unemployment area or a rural area, it used to be $500,000. Now it's up to $800,000 for that investment. And then, if it's individual in that you're making it direct investment and not pooling it together, Hudson Yards is pulling it together an investment for a project. It's still very much something people look to, especially for Chinese, Indian nationals, other nationals who the other ways to get green cards take a very long time. I'll specifically talk about Chinese nationals as we're going to talk about them a little bit later as well. But Chinese nationals have a 4 or 5 year wait to get a green card, even under EB5. For Indian nationals, 10, 12-year wait.
Why is it different? Why is it different among different countries?
Right. So the way the immigration laws are set up, there are quotas for each type of category for employment-based and family-based visas. For employment-based, the reason why it's even called EB5, it's the 5th preference. There are 5 preferences for the immigration for employment-based, and there are only so many immigrant visas a year. This is the time of year that's actually interesting and hard for us because we're getting close to the end of the government's fiscal year. So the amount of numbers have really been used. The government's fiscal year ends on September 30th. So this time of year, there's less, if even any, allowed. And there's just only so many and so many people applying. In fact, what I read about Hudson Yards is that the amount of foreign investors that were in it for EB5, that would fill up the quota for so many people that's why it takes so long. They're waiting in line. Think of it as the deli line in your supermarket. You get your priority date as the date it is filed, but the date where it comes up and they actually ask for your order for you're going to get that green card is going to take longer. Then the other thing is if it's a targeted investment employment area and they can file concurrently, that's really important. So there's the mechanism to file for the EB5 and then to approve the investment. And then there's the mechanism for the person to file it, for their part of the green card process. When you could file it together, at least you can get work authorization while you're waiting the 4 or 5 years if you're Chinese and longer if you're Indian. If you're from other countries, we talk about Canadians and the snowbirds. They want to move to Florida, which we'll also talk about Florida. Mm-hmm. Then it's quicker, but it's still not instantaneous. For people who think that, the minute you file the $1 million green card and you get handed a green card or even U.S. citizenship, it's just not true.
So how do companies take advantage of this? Are there any layers of regulation that makes it more difficult to acquire this money from foreign investors? How does it work?
There are many actors in this space, but the real main ones are the entities looking for the investment. So they're trying to make themselves as attractive as possible and show they're above board as possible. And also that there's going to be a return. Many foreign nationals, they're just very interested in being able to have status in the United States and a path for themselves, but and their children for the future. But many really want to make sure that they're going to get their money out of it in the future. So for the entities that are creating the projects or have the investment, they want to have, they need to do all the things to make sure it's above board. It's a real investment. If money's not going to go to waste, or if at least they understand that they might not get their investment back, it's actually created something, so the government's not going to have as much oversight. There's a lot more oversight from the U.S. government now on these because of all the publicity. And then the individuals who are investing, they must make sure to do their due diligence, and there are companies that do that due diligence. So they're paying for things throughout the process. The U.S. immigration side, the real estate side, the people doing the due diligence, and they have to make sure that these entities really exist.
Right.
Feel, touch it, go see it. I mean, J Peak is, a really good example of something that went terribly wrong. And I would say, the entities that are involved with creating the projects, there are other also companies are looking at this in other ways. Companies that might support their employees investing in these, or high net worth individuals, that you see that are looking for ways to immigrate to the United States. It's not always themselves that are looking to really be here, especially high net worth individuals may not want to be taxed at a rate. Once they get their green card, their worldwide income is subject to U.S. taxes. Now we've veered into tax a little bit,
Oh, okay.
but they want their families to be able to have a path here. Their daughter is going to school in the United States. They're only going to get work authorization for a year after that. They want to make sure that their children can stay here, have a life in the United States, and they're looking for these investment opportunities as well. The other thing that's new is that the USCIS, based on an act that was passed, was charging $10,000 to $20,000 per project for an audit to make sure that these really are above board. That was sued. There's litigation about that because that was a lot of money. Even though there's a lot of money in this space, still a lot of money going out that they've already put into it. It's a long wait, and they still need to do more. So people who already have these investments, and if you represent people who already have this, that's litigation that's ongoing to make sure whether they're going to have to pay this additional fees.
So who's actually facilitating putting the parties together? I'm assuming there might be more than one investor in one project, and there needs to be a facilitator involved. How do the parties connect?
The way we see it is that clients come to us, individual clients come to us and say, I'm looking at this EB5 project. Can you help me? Can you represent me in this process? And then the entities that are looking for EB5 investment have their own lawyers. And then there are middle people who are putting together the parties. So I see a lot of inquiries come in. I am looking at an EB5 franchise. Can you help us? Can you do the due diligence? And we can do a part of it, but they also need separate because we have a vested interest, right? We're representing them. We want it to go through. So does the EB5, the entity looking for the investment. They have a vested interest. So there are many different players in this space, and that's where people sometimes get themselves in trouble, and you have to be very careful. You wouldn't want an attorney to say, definitely go with this project. So that's inside baseball, right? Look at it all. Or the real estate attorney comes to us. What do you think about this? This looks okay. We've heard about this, but also these are the entities that do that due diligence. Be careful, because our names as well as yours go on this, and you want to be very careful in this space. Congress is very much interested in it. It sounds like buying a green card, but on the other hand, we're creating investment in the United States, which after COVID and everything that we want to go on here, we want to facilitate this. We want people to invest in the United States.
And from your experience, what size project would be appropriate? I mean, Hudson Yards was a huge project. I mean, can you use it for something, a smaller development where you're putting together maybe an assemblage on a small block, maybe putting up a residential tower? Is that enough to, use EB5 financing?
Absolutely, it is. I mean, are people even creating residential housing in Queens? I mean, there's these two things. A rural area seems like very clear what a rural area is, but in New York, and other places, it's the unemployment rate. And if we're talking about Hudson Yards, they're very interesting how they used where they were looking at to decide Hudson Yards was in a high unemployment rate. It was Central Park, and it was part of Harlem. Now, that was created by New York State. That you no longer can you use a state and local rules on what is a targeted employment area. Now it's federal rules. That's to clean up some of the things that went on. But in Queens, I'm sure in certain areas, and not to pick on Queens, but in Brooklyn, Staten Island, the Bronx, where I'm from, and other places, Newark, you really could put up a small residential building. If it's going to be small like that, then potentially it's a direct investment, and then you're the foreign nationals really directing it, and you have to show more. When you're pooling together, then you're taking advantage of the professionals better be professionals putting together and doing all the financing and all those things to make sure it's above board. But really, EB5 money is all over the place and it's continuing. And how that might change or, in a different administration, no matter which different administration is, it's sound bites for TV for people who are worried about foreign nationals. But on the other hand, states and local areas are really looking for this investment. We want people to invest.
Right. Are there actually incentives for using EB5 money rather than conventional financing?
Probably. It's a lot of money when you pull it together. And it is, in ways, conventional financing because the people actually have to show the capital and where it came from.
Right.
You have to show all that. And I will say back in the day, 15, 18, 20, even 20 years ago, I was handling for the firm hotels that were in New Jersey. That was EB5. That was before the big explosion in EB5 in the
Right.
in the 2000s. I had to show where the money came from, what they used it for, and then what happened with it. And this was around the economic downturn, what happened during that time. So I think it is very attractive. And really now, of course, with anything, it's just making sure you know who you're dealing with and being okay that you might not get your money out for 5, 10 years. You might never get your money out, and whether, the pros and cons of whether that's worth it for you.
Right. And have you noticed like a change in tendencies? I know that, there was a lot of discussion about the Chinese buying farmland. And now this trend on restricting foreign investment in real estate in the United States. How do you balance the two? And where do you see this going with these new laws that are rolling out at the local level?
This is a direct effect of what's happens in the media and the election and people talking and the southern border and people talking about immigration. The states trying to regulate federal immigration law, and it is federal, and an explosion of state rules and bills, potential bills for this. And Florida is an example of a bill that passed, SB 264, that said that Chinese nationals, and what's a Chinese national? It hinges on domicile. So even though people are reading it that if you're a Chinese national but you have a U.S. green card, which allows you to work and live in the United States, or even a Chinese citizen now has acquired U.S. citizenship, that they might be impacted too, to not be able to buy property in Florida. And then nationals from, and I want to say all the countries, from Russia, Iran, North Korea, Cuba, Venezuela, and Syria, not to be able to buy property within 10 miles of critical or infrastructure or military infrastructure. When they studied this in Florida, it's 98.5% of real property then for those nationals. And just even reading Cuba for Florida is really interesting, right? Because of the Cuban community there. This is a real issue. That legislation has, there is litigation against it, that it violates the fair housing law, but it's happening all over the place. It's not just Florida. I want to say that there's 151 bills restricting property ownership by foreign entities that have been considered by 32 states and 36 bills in Congress. Out of the 151, 71 are current consideration that would directly impact Chinese nationals. 12 were actually passed. This is in 2024. Law passed in Georgia, Idaho, Indiana, Iowa, Nebraska, Oklahoma, South Dakota, Tennessee, and Utah. And they're, besides what they actually mean, because you have to read each one to know whether it's only agriculture, it's real property, is what nationalities it is, although China is a common theme. Is it within 10 miles? Is it all real property? So it's very important, whoever you're dealing with and where they're looking to buy property, that you know the details of it. It has a chilling effect. In Florida specifically, even though people have their green card and they're U.S. citizens, they're like, why am I buying here? This is how they feel about me. This is not where I want to stay. Right. And it's affect the real estate business. Real estate brokers, agents have said people are calling, they're confused. And in Florida, it would be a felony. And it wouldn't only be a felony for the Chinese national, it would be for the real estate agent and for the seller. So a major chilling effect. While there's litigation, people are still like, why would I invest? And especially a high net worth investor, why would I put money in here that I don't know? First of all, it'll be criminal liable, and also they don't want me. So it's a real concern. It's harking back to a time in our immigration laws. I mean, the Chinese exclusion laws from the 1880s and, other laws that really restrictive. There, in some ways, obviously, we don't want bad actors. We don't want bad actors buying up our agriculture, buying up property that then makes our, us unsafe. But there's, having this huge swath of people and not being very specific doesn't help us at all. And again, the United States, runs on investment, and we want people to invest here. So it is really scary, and it is the trend. Now, how does that impact EB5? Obviously, the intersection of it. Obviously, nobody could take EB5 money from somebody who couldn't then invest in there, but that's lessening the amount of people for EB5 projects. And EB5 projects benefit US citizens, benefit local and state economy and the federal economy. So the chilling effect is real. And, just where is our country headed with this? And how it may change the election, it's really hard to know. The previous administration was very interested in EB5, but then very hard on it in practice, what we were seeing, from the US government, but the media and how they publicized it. And then the Biden administration, also very interesting. On the one hand, we want to attract foreign investors. On the other hand, putting into law this 10,000 and 20,000 audit and redesignation. We speak out of both sides very often, especially in U.S. immigration.
I have to say, Alexis, you're very passionate about the subject matter. How did you get into immigration?
Well, I have to say, I didn't know U.S. immigration law existed. I did in the 5th grade write an essay that was why it's important to vote as a citizen. I had to speak in front of a group of like 400 people at the the middle school district. I was scared out of my mind, but it does help me tell clients why they have to why they have to become citizens and vote. I decided at 10 years old to be a lawyer. I didn't know U.S. immigration was a thing then. I would have had no idea. But my first semester, second year, I had Professor Lenny Benson. I'll always be happy to drop her name. It was the first class. She was so dynamic and, spouting this law and that and the regulation. I asked a lot of questions. It was my first A in law school, which is good for my clients.
Okay.
And my father saw me, my textbook is here. He saw me on Thanksgiving break, like really studying. He's like, that's the first time I saw you really studying. I was like, it's really interesting. And she asked me to be her research assistant. And from there, and then a career in immigration law was born. But what I will say is that it's really interesting. The answer is not in one place. It's in 10 different places. I think very much like real estate in some ways too, right? Because you're looking not only in what the law says, state and local, how did that judge rule this time? What are you going to do? What was that deal? And at the end of the day, you're helping people. Whether they remember to say thank you or not, you've changed their lives, you've changed the US. They may change, create something, develop something, their kids might, whatever it is. The only thing that I might have thought about was how much it's tied to politics. It wasn't like that when I first started. And that can give you agita, depending on which channel you watch at night.
Yeah, I totally get that. And it's interesting too, because, you have the difference in the federal government with the local governments as well too. And you have a state like New York, which is very welcoming to immigration. And at the same time, you see all of these luxury, condos and co-ops being built to placate those, wealthy foreign investors who just want a trophy apartment in New York City worth millions and millions of dollars. And I guess that's great for investment, where we have a housing crisis here and people complain about housing for the people who actually live here. And you compare that to what Florida is doing, and how do you reconcile that, and where do you project this is going, and what trends do you see?
I mean, it's with all of it, right? Like New York City, New York, and New York City and the cities and everywhere actually needs immigrants. This is the history of our country. We need people to come here, both skilled and unskilled immigrants, and we're welcoming to family reunification. And I wasn't as worried about New York City with everything going on, because if we remember the 1970s and, New York City was, a dark time for us. The federal government told us you're on your own. It was immigrants that kept us afloat and to go forward. And it will be again. I mean, when I talk to clients, and the majority, I would say I do represent companies and corporations. They're so excited about the segments of the population that now have work authorization that they can fill in for the jobs that they need. But it's this tension, right? We need to be safe. We do need to know who's coming here. They do need to be vetted, and I can promise you they're vetted. And then we need workers, and we need housing. we need to go into the future. So we want entrepreneurs to come here. We want them to invest. We want them to create jobs and new avenues for us going forward. At the same time, you don't want to leave behind U.S. citizens, and make sure that everyone's coming up at the same time. And really, the statistics and all of it is that immigrants are good for the economy, and we just have to get away from the noise of, you know, the issues that have always been, it's one group after another and things that are said, and, you know, just have people on both sides of the aisle, you know what it really is, and make good laws that make sense for our modern economy and for the country that we've always been and want to be.
And what do you project happening with the migrants and how that may affect legal immigration? And, you know, you're talking about having, you know, workers come in and work. Is this going to be a surplus of workers? Or is the, you know, the illegals coming in going to take away opportunities from the legals and maybe pushing back their applications and causing some issues there?
Yeah, the asylum seekers that are coming in, and then the ones that are in New York, they have all been seen and given a court date if they can for the future, or if they're eligible for other programs. The problem that we were seeing is a lag in work authorization. And so as soon as, you know, they have legal work authorization, can put them to work, and I see our clients are hiring them for their plants, for, you know, for whatever they can. This is a real boon to the workers that they cannot find. Think about any industry that you know that they're looking for people, besides service industries, truckers, you know, whatever it is. And it's very important to have a work authorization card, and then to be able to get a driver's license and do all those things. They also need housing. I mean, we certainly have a housing crisis, as you mentioned. I mean, there's always a tension between the people who have been here and then first generation, who are very much like, I did it this way. But really, in my 27 years, I can tell you the people that I was in court with who did it this way, they actually had interesting ways of coming into the country, and then were able to fix themselves, and subsequent, you know, generations being able to do the same thing. There's a large pie, and there's ways to do it. The government has to be on board with it and get work authorization on quickly. There really is enough, but there actually is, for the people who came here 10, 15 years ago, there is, you know, what we can do next for them. And we'll have to wait and see what actually happens in this election, because there are plans to do that, but it is a political football, and it gets hard depending on where you are in the country.
What general advice do you have for my clients in the real estate business and your clients in the corporate?
For anyone dealing with foreign national, I would say make sure, if there's any question that they're foreign national, it comes up U.S. immigration, even if they're already looking, you're handling the real estate, you already have someone for the tax, you're doing the tax. It's never hurts to talk to a U.S. immigration attorney, a competent one, and find out if there's any things you're not thinking about, especially the tax implications. There's, you know, whether then owning that property is going to create a tax implication, what that means for them, or they tell you, I'm so close to my green card, and they don't realize that their worldwide income is subject to U.S. taxes, and they want to make sure to put things in place, how they own that property, whether they directly own it or, you know, as an entity they own it through. And then really, then anything that comes up, just get that advice. All lawyers know other lawyers. You know a U.S. immigration lawyer, definitely ask the question. And the other thing I would say is, anyone you know who has, like I said, who's on the fence about getting their U.S. citizenship, now is the time. As a U.S. citizen, you never have to spend another day in the United States, although you still have tax implications. But as a green card holder, if you're outside the United States too long, it can be taken away. There's issues with returning. And I always think that I'll harken back to my 10-year-old self. You want to have the full rights in the United States and being able to vote. I don't know if serving on a jury is that people are that interested in doing that, but lawyers can now too. Very important to have your vote count, have a vote and have it count, so we can have really good, fair immigration laws that help investors in the United States.
Well, I certainly appreciate your input and the time on the show. Everybody, Alexis Axelrad, thank you.